I'm finally here to make up for the fact that I said I was going to do a reading update every 2 months this year and then didn't do a single other one. So today we're going to cover every single book that I've read from March through August, I think, because I'm moving on Tuesday, which is why my bookshelves are not really in frame, because I did them. Here's a photo of how beautiful they looked. And because I'm moving, I had to like take half of the books off the shelf to take with me, and now it looks like shit, so I can't actually film in front of them after all this time. I decided, because like I feel like I've been spending too much time on TikTok, and like the last couple of videos I did in here were very like cut, dry, like just say what you need to say. So I'm going to take it back to basics, and I'm just going to talk about these books for as long as I want to, because that's what this is for. All of my thoughts that no one asked for. Going back to March, I did a reread of my favourite book, The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I actually annotated this. I didn't put tabs on it because it would have been a tab on like every single page, but I underlined the fuck out of this book. If you don't know, this is a retelling of the Trojan War. It's about Patroclus and Achilles, and their kind of budding romance, lifelong from boyhood to manhood love story, but also it's about war and the human condition and the politics, and it is a goddamn tragedy, and it's such a beautifully written book. This has my entire soul. This is probably my favourite characterisation in any book. Achilles is the character that I have like the most complicated relationship with out of any character in any book ever. There's a reason that these stories have been passed down for hundreds and hundreds of years, if not thousands. Madeline Miller, the way that she retells the story is so beautiful. Every single page has just the most beautiful prose, and it's completely accessible. It's not like flowery prose, it's just so well crafted, so well written. It will leave you feeling warm but also empty, and it is just harrowing and so tragic. It's so tragic, my god. It's not going to work for everyone. Again, it's like a heavily like a war story. A lot of the portions of the book are set during the Trojan War, and I'm not usually into war stories, but it's so much more about the human side of the war and the emotional impact and what it meant to have a legacy and to be a hero. And oh my god, I love it so much. Yeah, I'm silencing myself on this one because I will just go forever. Then I did another reread. I decided to reread I'm Thinking of Anythings by Ian Reid, which I read. That's the word read so many times. I read this like a couple years ago, I think, and I really liked it the first time. This is like a literary thriller, like horror, about a couple who go on a road trip to visit his family's farm, and just weird, eerie, ominous shit starts to happen. It's very like psychological horror. I didn't like it as much as the first time, but it was better than I thought it was going to be, because I started it off and I was like, oh no, this is really bad actually. But it wasn't that bad. It was actually, I kind of liked it. This book is entirely pretentious. Like the conversations that the couple have, specifically in the car, are like her internal monologue, the unnamed narrator of this book. So pretentious, but kind of sounds like my brain, which is why I had to be like, right, humble myself, because I sound like this and I talk to my friends like this. A lot of the conversations in here about like relationships and like human connection and why we have relationships and what purpose they serve in our lives. I hate the like mystery in it. I think it's really badly done. It's really like cliche. There's like these little chapters in between that kind of like are these threads of mystery, and I just think it's so unnecessary, and I don't like the way it's done. And the ending is kind of shit. Like the ending kind of like sequence is good, but the actual ending I think is so stupid and like downplays so much of the psychology of the book, and it's just like a silly like spooky ending. I don't know. Mixed feelings on this one, but generally I did enjoy it, and it is short, so like I don't blame myself for reading it. I probably would again in like 10 years and see what I thought. Then I read Juniper and Thorn by Ava Reid. My friend is borrowing my copy, so I don't have it right now. But this is a extremely gothic retelling of the fairy tale of the Juniper Tree. I have never read the fairy tale of the Juniper Tree, so I don't know how this goes off the source material. This is baseline a story about 3 sisters who are witches, and their very abusive father who basically sells them to men who are like intrigued by their powers, and they come into their house and the sisters do their magic, and it's weird and fucked up. This is primarily a story about trauma, healing from trauma, facing your abusers, It's also a love story. There's so much yearning, like the most intense yearning I've ever read, which I ate it up, obviously. This book is so dark, like really heavy on the trigger warnings for this one. It does not hold back, especially because the writing style is so descriptive and very lyrical. I kind of didn't love the writing of this book. There is a simile and or metaphor genuinely like every other line, which I found so tiring. Like, I almost DNF'd this book a couple times because I just didn't understand why the fuck she needed to do a simile constantly, especially because she would repeat them because you're gonna run out at some point. I think it was a really well crafted book, very well structured. Like, I think Ava Reid is a really good writer, but I did not understand the writing choice. But I'm in the minority. Like, everyone thinks that it's beautifully well written and it's generally a very well loved book from people who read it, so maybe it's just me and maybe that's part of the gothic style that I'm not used to, but I really just didn't like that at all. But I loved it as a story about trauma, about facing abusers, about anti-Semitism. I think while reading I had a slightly worse opinion of the book than I do now. Like, I didn't love the reading experience, but in hindsight I really enjoy like the dark magic, because it is like a fantasy book. There are witches, I said that, but there's a lot of like fucked up magic and shit, and really good symbolism for like, there's a lot of like eating disorder symbolism and like consumption, and I think there are layers to this book. It would be fun to study it. I just hated the writing style sometimes. That was actually part of the trans rights readathon that was going on TikTok at the time, where for a week we were raising money for trans organisations and general like awareness for the horrific state of the world around trans issues by reading books by trans authors. Ava Reid's a non-binary author, didn't know that up until that time. And also for that I read Pet by Akwaeke Emezi. This was my first Akwaeke Emezi and oh my god. This is a YA kind of like, I was gonna say dystopian, but it's kind of like a utopian. Our protagonist Pet lives in a world where there are no monsters anymore. They've been eradicated by the angels. This book is entirely allegory. You will quickly learn that. Pet's mother paints a monster, which then comes out of the painting, and Pet is like, what the fuck are you here for? And he's like, I'm here to hunt a monster. And she's like, we don't have any monsters here anymore, even though you look like a monster, so what the fuck's going on? Kind of becomes about figuring out the real monsters in the world, and you cannot beat oppression until you recognise that it's there. It's not just about oppression though, it is generally about the importance of evils in the world and education and acknowledgement of evils. I'm explaining this terribly. Yeah, the writing is so good. This was my first and not my last Akwaeke Emezi, as you will come to discover. Again, just a really well crafted story, such a creative idea. I loved the like weird monsters, angels imagery. Yeah, I really enjoyed this book. It's very impactful for how short it is. Sorry if the angle's changed. I was getting coffee. But the last thing I read for that readathon was Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe, which is a graphic memoir kind of about our discovery of being non-binary and gender non-conformity, and like how being non-binary interacts with discovering your sexuality, about your in relationships, a lot of complex shit that all interact with gender in a way that you don't realise until you're experiencing feelings of gender non-conformity. Around the time of this readathon, I was kind of like discovering my own gender identity and coming to accept being non-binary myself. I feel like specifically this memoir inevitably was quite impactful and very, very validating, even though my experience is completely different to Ayers, and I also don't use neopronouns, and that was something that I feel like I came to understand more through reading this. I feel like every book that I've read about the non-binary experience, I can't imagine it not being beneficial for anyone to read, especially if you don't understand it, which when you don't experience feelings of gender non-conformity, it is hard to understand, inevitably. And I thought this was a really, really good starting point for trying to understand those things. A little bit cringy at times, but that's fine. Everyone had a cringy teenage experience. I'm with you. After that, I decided to finally read The Hobbit. I actually started out reading this physical... Why did I say it like that? Started out reading this physical copy. I love this little like cringy like 90s cover. Oh, obsessed. But But then I decided that I wanted to listen to the audiobook along with it, and I found this one on my library, which was less of an audiobook and more of like a dramatization. And I came to learn that very quickly because I couldn't not follow along the book with it at all because it was so unhinged. It was like a full production value. Like, it sounded like a movie was playing. It sounded like they were recording it while on a quest, and the voice actors were going so hard. Like, whoever voiced Gollum, rent was due. So I gave up on the physical copy and I just decided to listen to that because it was wildly entertaining. So I was kind of dipping in and out of that for a while, which I tend to do with audiobooks, and then tend to not have the most immersive experience with them because of that. So I would definitely reread this in the future. I just kind of wanted to read it because I wanted to eventually read The Lord of the Rings, obviously. And it was a good starting point. It was fun. I love a quest. I'm never not going to love a quest. But I think I probably didn't give it the due diligence that it deserved in this listening experience. So I just thought it was fun and fine, and obviously changed the trajectory of fantasy forever, so I don't want to like downplay it. But yeah, I enjoyed it enough. Thanks, Tolkien. It's a good world you built there. On my like easy cozy fantasy train, I decided to read Kiki's Delivery Service because this is one of my favourite movies. Is it? It used to be my favourite Studio Ghibli film, and now I think that Howl's Moving Castle has taken over, and maybe also Spirited Away. But it's like in the top 5. First half of this is basically identical to the movie. If you don't know what it's about a little witch called Kiki who, for her coming of age, goes away and finds a town that has no other witches in it, settles down, she starts to stay with a little baker, and she starts up a delivery service, and that's how she makes her... She doesn't even make money. There's no like money in this. She just gets a place to live because she performs acts of delivery for people on her broom, and it's whimsical and fun and silly, and it's one of those things where like almost every single person you meet is just so kind-hearted and like well-meaning, and it makes my heart happy. This was fun and I had a good time. There's not much to say. It's cute and I will always recommend it. And then I was having too much fun, so I decided to pick up The Death of Vivek Oji by Koike Mezi. After reading Pet, I knew that I wanted to read more by them. And my god, the first line of the blurb of this book is, "They burned down the market on the day that Vivek Oji died." So you know that you're in for something very intense and very heart-wrenching, and that's exactly what this was. Beautifully written kind of character study about Vivek and the people surrounding them, and it is about Nigeria's relationship with gender and otherness and sexuality and queerness. Deeply depressing but deeply necessary and deeply human, and again, like, heavy on the trigger warnings for this one. It's quite fucked up. It's so visceral, so evocative, so emotive. But I think, again, it's one of those ones where the reading experience, I was kind of dipping in and out, and then now in hindsight, I'm more like, wow, that was incredible, and again, so well crafted and so impactful. I can't believe how short this book is. There's talks about grief in here that generally sit with me like every day. There's one line about grief that I can't find anywhere, but if I do find it, I'll put it here, that I think about all the time. I don't know why, that just stuck with me so heavily. Books with grief tend to do that. But yeah, this was beautiful and brutal, tender. I would just become a thesaurus for that book anyway. And then I wanted like a silly little fun romance. And so I picked up Honey and Spice by Bolo Babalola, and it ended up being so much more than that. This is like genuinely like a good book, like not even as a romance book, but as like a character driven book. This is about Kiki, who has a radio station on her college campus where she gives out dating advice, basically how to not be like fucked over by men, and Malachi, who is a videographer, one of those. It's been a while. They end up fake dating. I wonder what happens. But yeah, this is a book that it's very long, so you'd like hope that it had more than the romance going on, and it very much does. There's a lot of conflicts out with the actual central romance, and a lot of conversations about the general like anxieties around a relationship, which I loved and felt was very relatable, not even just with the main couple, with other couples in the book as well. This book is genuinely funny. Everyone talked about the banter in this book, but it's true. I like out loud giggled a couple times at this book, and that doesn't happen more than a couple times actually. Yeah, this is a romance book that probably won't make you cringe very much at all, because the writing is actually good, and again, it's not just about romance, it is kind of about relationship trauma and things like that, and I very much recommend. I get the hype with this book. Bolu Babalola, again, just a generally good writer. I have to put my coffee down for this one because I read the Caraval trilogy. You know I love whimsical, magical bullshit, and that's what it gave me. I'll try and sum up the 3 books very briefly, but this is basically about 2 sisters who get invited to the game of Caraval, which is like a magical, like self-contained game world full of magic, and it is like a kind of following clues, and you talk to strangers along the way. You don't really know who's involved and who isn't, and there's a bunch of people playing this game hoping to meet the person who runs it, called Legend. The first book, very whimsical, very fun, very just like magical feeling, which I loved. Lots of twists and turns, like constantly like twist, fast paced, let's go. And it's also YA, so it's kind of like a little bit juvenile sometimes. Like there's romance in this book which I think is so silly, but like you just kind of overlook it. Second book, loved. The narrator feels a little bit more mature, the romance feels a little bit more mature. The vibes of this book are less like the magical whimsy of the last one and more like the only way I can think to describe the imagery is like a deck of cards, which also love, like very like Alice in Wonderland feeling, but not like childlike whimsy. It's hard to explain. And the finale was kind of shit. Don't know what happened. I was in it for like the first half because like I was so invested in the story, and I think that Stephanie Garber just set up like way too much more than she could handle. Like she made it so much more convoluted and full than it needed to be, that she was like tripping over herself trying to wrap any of it up. And I hate that this is canon. Like I wanted it to end on a bang because it was such a good set of books, and it just kind of didn't. I think that overall it's definitely worth it to read these if they sound like something you'd be interested in, because I loved them. And again, it's easy. It is easy. It's YA, fast paced. The writing is fine. But yeah, really, what happened, Stephanie? What happened? But I know that I have Once Upon a Broken Heart, which is the first of the like spin-off, or I don't know if it's prequel, but it's like set in the same world about a character from these books trilogy, which I'm so excited about because the character that it is very interesting to me. And I read None of the Above by Travis Alabanza, which I'm currently lending to my dad because I recommended it highly and he said he was very interested. But this is a kind of memoir essay collection about Travis's experience being gender non-conforming. Once again, I've been on the non-binary books trend because it gives me a sense of healing. This was a memoir but also had so much about like generally society's relationship to binaries and like putting people in a box and why they are upheld in society that way, and like the harmful power that comes with why we do that, the like racism behind it, the colonialism, the white supremacy, and all these things that are being upheld by binaries, and why people are so scared of gender nonconformity and scared of understanding gender nonconformity and the refusal to understand. This is about sex, this is about dating, this is about expression, this is about race, this is about privilege. There is so much in here, and it's really short, and again very fast-paced because it is like it's basically little short, I guess, like essays or stories from Travis's life. But yes, I absolutely loved it. I think they're a great writer and I would love to have a conversation with them. If you know nothing about gender nonconformity, read it. It will teach you a lot. If you know a lot about it, it will probably be super cathartic for you to read. Again, I don't think there's anyone who wouldn't benefit from reading this book, and that's why my dad is reading it, because he always wants to learn more about that stuff, and I love him for that, and I think he's enjoying it so far, so take it from Jim. Then I read A Tempest of Emerald Dream by William J. Wood. This is a very fast-paced kind of quest fantasy, found family about Illyria, who discovers she has magical powers, classic, and that she needs to go on like a quest to this city to like save everyone. I kind of don't remember, I'm gonna be honest. it's not the most well crafted or the most original fantasy story. You've probably read something similar to it before, but it's the author's debut. I'm not going to be too harsh on it. The characters are fine. I kind of wish they were a little bit more, I don't know, I guess there wasn't really time to like delve into them further. They're distinguishable from each other, and again, I think for like a debut novel, this was a fun enough time, and it's very beautiful. So then, oh my god, if you remember, in January I read Legendborn and I absolutely loved it, and I said I was starting Bloodmarked immediately, which is the sequel, and then I didn't for a long time because it's really easy to like forget how good a book was or how much you enjoyed it when you're not reading it anymore, and I kind of just never wanted to try with Bloodmarked again because I was scared of not liking it as much. But I finally did it. I read Bloodmarked, and why did I wait? This duology of books, first of all, a recap. This is in kind of retelling of Arthur and the Round Table, set in modern day America, but there's like secret societies, and it's a lot about grief. It's largely about grief and colonialism and the grief that lives in colonialism. These are magnificent, like the best YA fantasy I've ever read. I've not even read that much, so it doesn't mean anything, but I can tell that there's probably not anything out there that is as good as this. Every single character in this book, although the one flaw I have is that there's way too many characters who are very like, I don't really know who any of them are in comparison to each other, because there's like, it's this huge secret society, so there's a lot of characters who are just kind of there but not really there, and then some of them end up being important and I'm like, who are you? But yes, the characters, the like main group of characters, they're real people. They're real people to me because they're so well written, and just the fucking crafting of this book. I think it had like a little bit of second book syndrome, if you will, where I can tell that like the next one, I have a feeling the next one's going to be the best of the three, and I shouldn't say that, but I just feel it because this was still so good, like for a second book, so good. There was like probably like this portion at the end I wasn't as interested in. Obviously it gets really good at the end again. The final battle, I was literally like screeching, like I was listening to, like as I did with the first one, really like intense like orchestral music. They were like playing a score for the movie, and I was losing my mind because the magic system is so good. I digress. I just love this duology of books. I think it's incredible. Will I wait ages to read the third book when it comes out? Probably, because I'm fucking stupid, but I just don't want it to end, and it's so good. Just give it a try, even if you like, just give it a try. There's no loss, because at the very least you're gonna like appreciate it for the craft that it is and the like commentary it is on colonialism and the world that it builds. There's just no way you can read this and think it's like objectively bad. There's just no way. And finally, literally like an hour ago, I finished the audiobook for The Ghosts of Rose Hill. This was kind of like, I think it's, I would say probably YA, maybe middle grade as well, possibly. Light fantasy about a girl whose parents send her away to her aunt's for the summer. I forgot about my coffee, it's gonna be cold. She goes and stays with her aunt who lives on top of Rose Hill. And on the top of the hill there's a cemetery, a Jewish cemetery, because she is visiting her aunt in Prague, which her father was from but then fled because of the like political climate. And this is a book about the ghosts of trauma and the ghosts of oppression. She does find physical ghosts in the cemetery because they've been forgotten. I actually was really impressed by it. I thought it was really beautiful and haunting, and there is like a central plot, like there is like an actual villain and whatnot, but I think the reason it was so good is because it was kind of about like remembering horrific oppression and remembering the dead, and it was very well written. The prose was really nice. The narrator on this audiobook was so ass, like I fucking hated it. I wish that I would have had it physically, but I couldn't afford to buy the book. But I recommend reading it physically because you can kind of also get like a more vivid image in your mind of what it sounded like rather than this fucking narrator. It's a bit dark at times. There is like ghost children, which is just depressing. Yeah, there was a lot in here, and I thought it was a nice, very nice read. And as for currently reading, I've been on and off listening to the audiobook for a long time for Vagabonds, which is a story about the city in Nigeria of Lagos. Oh my god, this book is so interesting. This is like a short story. Is it a short story collection? It kind of is, but they're all interwoven. A lot of like weird POVs about kind of, again, like vagabonds, as the name suggests about queerness and otherness in Nigeria. So interesting. The writing is so captivating and very weird, and like the city of Lagos itself is like a character in the stories. A lot of like surrealism, kind of like magical realism. You're in like the afterlife at some point. There's lots of like weird wackiness. It is deeply depressing at times, but overall just really surreal and really interesting, which is why I'm not giving up on it. I just come in and out of it because I want to actually appreciate it. Again, I might buy the physical copy. And right now I am kind of primarily reading Near to the Wild Heart by Clarice Lispector. Oh my god. Like halfway through this book, and it's one of those ones where at the start I was kind of like, oh, I'm not going to connect with this because it's really quite surreal, more like abstract than what I'm used to reading. I wouldn't even call it surreal, it's just quite weird. The narration is very weird. It's kind of just like being inside a woman's head, weird timelines and shit like that. But oh my god, the writing is absolutely unbelievable. Like, this is one of the ones where every 3 pages she says something like genuinely profound, and you're like, how did someone write this? How did someone write this? The back of this says that the Spectre should be on the shelf with Kafka and Joyce. I've not read Kafka or Joyce, and let me tell you, I agree. The book that I think studying would be like insanely fulfilling. Like, I feel like you could study this for like months and get more out of it because there's just so much there. But generally what I am picking up on it, and I'm just letting myself read it and know that I'm missing stuff or whatever, is that it's incredibly well written and I'm fascinated. And so much of this I just want to like etch into my brain, because how did someone string words together in that way? That's everything I've read for a little while. I wanted to film this before I moved out so I wouldn't be without my books, which I'm deeply sad about. But anyway, hopefully I will be reading more. I've just started college for creative writing and we do a little bit of reading in that, so eventually there'll be some things on my syllabus in these videos, which is fun and I'm loving it. And what are you reading right now? Let me know. I'm talking to you, Kian and Frankie, if you're still watching, if anyone's watching. I'm falling back in love with books and writing and reading, and it's so great and so fun, which is why I wanted to do this. And I hope you all do too, and you're reading good shit. Have a good night, get a coffee. Love you. Why did I say that? Christ.